Hey team. All right, so tonight you're going to read pages 109 to 122. You may or may not have a reading quiz on Thursday or Friday. Hint, 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 hint. So you want to make sure that you are getting caught up. All right. And then we're going to do a little work together in class, of course. So let's dive in. So we're going to be talking today about what intersectionality is. If you've never heard of that before, you have no clue what I'm talking about, I'm going to teach you. And then we're going to read about Audre Lorde, who was a Black lesbian author, poet, activist. She was super, super amazing. And she did a lot of work on intersectionality. So once we kind of know what that is, then we're going to read what she has to say about it. All right, so intersectionality is basically the overlap and the connectedness of your social classifications. So what race you're in, what socioeconomic class you're in, your sexual orientation, the gender that you present as, things like that. So it's not like necessarily, how you look, like brown hair versus blonde hair or tall versus short. It's the groups. It's kind of like if when you're filling out like forms for school or whatever, like those statistics that you would fill out, like check the box if you're, non-white Hispanic, check this box if you are identify as female or you prefer not to say, check this box if you're straight, check this box if you're bi, right? It's like that kind of stuff. So as an example, let's take somebody that we know, James Baldwin, right? So we know he's gay, right? So that's its own piece of his identity. He's a cisgendered male. So cisgendered means that you look, behave, and feel like the gender that matches your biological sex, right? Your genitals. So those would be people who have a penis and identify as male, and people who have a vagina and identify as female. That's what cisgendered means. Okay. So we know he's gay, we know he's cisgendered, and we also know he's Black, right? So these things come together to make up who James is, right? He's not fully James if you take away one of these things. All right. So you could, if you wanted to practice, you could do your own. It can also include things like age, right? So if you want, you can kind of draw out a little diagram like this of your own intersectionality if you want some practice. Oh, and I'm actually going to ask you to do it. Haha, I got ahead of myself. So I'm going to ask you to draw out your own intersectionality, and I'll put James Baldwin's back up on the video so you can kind of have a cue for how that might look. And you might have more than just those three things that we talked about with James. You might include sexual orientation, straight, gay, queer, bi. You might include age, you might include religion, you might include your political party. I'm not going to ask you to share with us, but I want you to actually see what this looks like visually. So grab a piece of scrap paper and draw this out for yourself. And you want to make sure that all the circles, there's a point at which all of the circles overlap with each other, right? There's a point, there's a space at which they all touch, right? So you see this right here, that would be the space. You want to make sure there's a space where all of your circles are overlapping one another. Okay, so pause the video and go ahead and draw out your own intersectionality. Excuse me. Okay, so now that you've done your own intersectionality, let's talk about Audre Lorde because she does a lot of work on this. So, like I said, she's a gay, lesbian, whichever term you prefer. She liked them both. So she was gay, Black poet and activist. And the reason why we're looking at her work is kind of what we've been talking about all year long, right? there's not one story of the LGBTQ community, right? It's not just about the gay white man. And especially because our main character of our book is a gay white man, we want to look at other perspectives. So it's about people of other races. It's about people who are not male or cis male. It's people who are trans, people who are cis female. And it's all sexual orientations as well, right? It's not just the fully gay person, it's the person who is mostly gay and a little straight, or the person who's kind of half and half, right? Or the person who's like mostly straight but a little bit gay, right? It's a spectrum. So we want to look at how that kind of makes each of us up. Okay, so in your iLearn, you're going to go into your Audre Lorde article and you're looking for 2.16 Audre Lorde. And this one is called Age, Race, Class, and Sex, Women Redefining Difference. So she's looking at intersectionality, right? And how that affects us. So I'm going to read through the first two questions. We'll do those together. And then you're going to read the rest on your own. And this is a little bit longer than stuff that we normally read, but I think you're really going to find it interesting. She's got some incredible things to say. So let's get started. Much of Western European history conditions us to see human differences in simplistic opposition to each other. Dominant and subordinate, good and bad, up and down, superior, inferior. In a society where good is defined in terms of profit rather than in terms of human need, there must always be some group of people who, through systemized oppression, can be made to feel surplus, to occupy the place of the dehumanized inferior. So basically, there's always going to be a group of people who are made to feel less than. Within this society, that group is made up of Black and third world people, working class people, older people, and women. As a 49-year-old Black lesbian feminist socialist mother of two, including one boy, and a member of an interracial couple, I usually find myself as a part of some group defined as other, deviant, inferior, or just plain wrong. Traditionally, in American society, it is the members of the oppressed, objectified groups who are expected to stretch out and bridge the gap between the actualities of our lives and the consciousness of our oppressor. So basically what she's saying is that like the way we've set up race relations in the country, right, is it's the responsibility of Black people to tell white people, right, where they're wrong. It's their responsibility to be better. It's their responsibility to solve the problem. Same works with other issues of intersectionality. It's the responsibility of people in the LGBTQ community to reach out and tell the straight folks what's up. Okay, that's what she's saying. Okay, so in order to survive, those of us for whom oppression is as American as apple pie have always had to be watchers, to become familiar with the language and the manners of the oppressor, even sometimes adopting them for some illusion of protection. Whenever the need for some pretense of communication arises, those who profit from our oppression call upon us to share our knowledge with them. In other words, it is the responsibility of the oppressed to teach the oppressors their mistakes. I am responsible for educating teachers who dismiss my children's culture in school. Black and third world people are expected to educate white people as to our humanity. Women are expected to educate men. Lesbians and gay men are expected to educate the heterosexual world. The oppressors maintain their position and evade responsibility for their own actions. There was a constant drain of energy, which might be better used in redefining ourselves and devising realistic scenarios for altering present and constructing the future. Okay, so let's just break this down real quick. What are the elements of Audre Lorde's intersectionality that she tells us here? There might be more, but what are the ones that she tells us here? Okay, so I find myself going back to this very first sentence. So see if you can use that to help you. All right, if you need more time, that's fine. You can pause the video. I'm gonna continue on. So somewhere on the edge of consciousness, there is what I call a mythical norm, which each one of us within our hearts knows that is not me. In America, this norm is usually defined as white, thin, male, young, heterosexual, Christian, and financially secure. It is with this mythical norms that the trappings of power reside within the society. Those of us who stand outside that power often identify one way in which we are different, and we assume that to be the primary cause of all oppression, forgetting other distortions around difference, some of which we ourselves may be practicing. By and large, with the women's movement today, white women focus upon their oppression as women and ignore the differences of race, sexual preference, class, and age. There is a pretense to the homogeneity, the sameness of experience covered by the word sisterhood that does not, in fact, exist. Unacknowledged class differences rob women of each other's energy and creative insight. Recently, a women's magazine collective made the decision for one issue to print only prose, saying poetry was a less rigorous or serious art form. Yet even the form our creativity takes is often a class issue. Of all the art forms, poetry is the most economical. It's the one which is the most secret, the one which requires the least physical labor, the least material, the one which can be done between shifts in the hospital pantry, on the subway, and on scraps of surplus paper. Over the last few years, writing a novel on tight finances, I came to appreciate the enormous differences in material demands between poetry and prose. As we reclaim our literature, poetry has been the major voice of the poor, working class, and colored women. A room of one's own may be a necessity for writing prose, but so are reams of paper, a typewriter, and plenty of time. The actual requirements to produce the visual arts also help determine, along class lines, whose art is whose. In this day of inflated prices for material, who are our sculptors, our painters, our photographers? When we speak of broadly based women's culture, we need to be aware that the effect of class and economic differences on the supplies available for producing art. Ignoring the differences of race between women and the implications for those differences presents the most serious threat to the mobilization of women's joint power. Okay, so let's pause there and do our second question, which says, why is it an issue when we don't acknowledge intersectionality and difference? Okay, so two things are coming up for me. The first is where she says here, unacknowledged class differences rob women of each other's creativity and insight. So basically, if we don't acknowledge the different experiences of other people, we can't learn and broaden our own perspective. And the other thing that stands out for me here is where she's talking about the supplies, right? If we don't acknowledge that it takes so much money to be a painter, then we can't truly answer the question. Then we're never going to have a true representation of painters from all different walks of life, right? Because not everybody has access to those resources. So I'm going to say it takes resources. I'm going to say it takes more resources for certain kinds of art. And because of that, we can't have true representation in those forms of art. Okay. You're going to continue on your own from here. If you run into trouble,